Hi everyone, and I guess a quick note just to excuse my appearance. I had a some minor surgical procedures that can take a week or so to heal. Um, anyway, so we're going to be doing in this lecture Gabriel Garcia de Marquez's A Very Old Man with Enormous Wings, kind of a famous short story writer by probably the greatest and certainly best known of the Latin American, magical realists, is what they call them. The magical realism, the only thing you really need to know of it, it's a sort of subgenre of literary sort of styles, and um, essentially these are tend to be somewhat realistic stories and somewhat realistic worlds, but they have these sort of wild, often crazy, sort of supernatural elements to them, and you get that certainly here. It almost reads like a fantasy story. This one, and the big conceit here, there's a few, but the major one is the man that falls from the sky, right? And we get that sort of somewhat beautiful, also somewhat ominous opening, right, where the sea and the sky had become a single gray thing, and it rained for I guess 4 or 5 days straight again. Almost a little bit, a lot of religious allegory here, and somewhat reminiscent almost of the flood story. You can either go to the Christian Bible or Mesopotamia and other places for the flood story is pretty common actually among ancient mythology, because they were often the first civilizations all often were near a water source, and they often had major floods were a big part of their culture, and their lore. Anyway, the crabs and everything washed into the house, right? And it is a young couple with a very sick baby, right? And then as he went out, Pelayo, I believe his name was, realizes there's something out in the yard, and he's not quite sure with it until he got close enough. He could tell it was a man, an old man, and he couldn't get up because he was impeded by his enormous wings. And okay, so now we're in a very strange sort of place here, and essentially, and again, they have a sick baby. Sick baby gets better after this, by the way. So, um, and I think that probably if you want to interpret this story, the easiest sort of quickest way to get there would be to remember, a few things from the Christian Bible, particularly. Number one, that Christ himself was supposed, while the Messiah tarries, right, he is supposed to come back. Now, this is not the Christ himself here. This is an angel, but you're supposed to recognize the Christ when he comes back, and I believe you're supposed to recognize um, an angel too, and they don't seem. They're very doubtful, right? I think the other quote that maybe is even better for interpreting the story is remembering that famous Christ saying that, what you do to the least among me, you do to me, right? And that Christ was always, Mary Magdalene, and he was always the voice, and the poor were all his people, right? The people that were the worst off, and that was who he was most interested in, and that this man who does appear to be an angel. Nobody else has wings, and how does this town, little village, really treat him? I don't know that any of them come out very well. There's a certain amount of tongue-in-cheek sort of humor here. There's also a couple of different. You've got the sort of old, sort of folk wisdom of the old medicine woman, right? Who seems to think they should be feeding him mothballs for some unexplainable reason, and thinks he's probably an angel, but he's so old the rain must have knocked him down. I mean, you got to be pretty old, I think, for rain to knock you down. But then they go to the modern Christian priest too, and the priest doesn't come off very good either. He assumes he can't possibly be an angel since he doesn't speak Latin, and again, that is as certain. Ideologues and religious sorts sometimes can do, right? Getting the the simple mixed up for the deeper thing, right, or the real thing, and that is a really shallow and not a very deeply spiritual religious person who would assume that was undoubtable, proof that he wasn't an angel, right? And again, the townspeople don't come off very well either throughout this, and neither even does the young couple, whose baby was very sick at the beginning of this, and everybody's wanting this angel to perform miracles, but he doesn't look the way the way angels are painted as, right? And the more commercialized, almost Disney-fied, not quite, but you know what I mean, sort of sentimentalized the paintings, little cherub children, on fluffy clouds with the wings and all. Boy, he's not like that. He's very corporeal, right? Very much of flesh but again, that is what Christ was put here too. And again, how do they treat Christ? Well, even worse, I would guess, than this town seems to treat this angel. And again, because he doesn't meet their sort of expectations, they're not very kind to him. And again, the young couple, after everyone's coming to see him, get the idea of charging, I think, a nickel a piece or something. And boy, there's lines, for miles down the road or whatever to come see this angel. And the angel himself, by the way, is described in remarkable detail. By the way, some of the strongest writing in the piece by Marquez, and just his feathers are dirty and they're caked with mud, and he's strewn with parasites. So again, the sort of the decay and contagion and all the messiness and dirtiness of fleshly life, right, is hung on this angel. He's not just spirit, and not much of the spirit. And because of that, they again, I think they react the way they do. But the couple certainly isn't shy about making a few bucks off this angel, and makes a lot. And again, after they do beat this angel, right, their sick child gets better, and what any parent would want, and then they get wealthy from charging the admission. The people come in, and they're not too green. They poke him at one point, and he's sort of aloof. He's not very interested in them either. He's sort of speaking in tongues, it seems like, and chanting what feel like ancient mariner songs or something. And at one point, they poke him with a hot poker because they think he might be dying or something, and he gets up and he swoops. And then they get this sort of fear of God struck into him a little bit, right? And it was a great, again, the description by Marquez there, where this swept up a sort of cyclone, I think is the word he used, or well, the translator anyway used, of galactic dust and muck and everything, and you kind of get the most. And again, where do they put him? They put him in a chicken coop. And again, I don't know exactly what you're supposed to do with an angel if he comes down into your town, but I'm pretty sure you're not supposed to put him in the fucking chicken coop, right? So that is where he ends up, and the chickens themselves kind of looking at him a little out of their little side-eyed, and sort of curious about him. But anyway, it proceeds on like this for a while, and again, the priest, came, kind of lost interest. By the way, what does he do? He sort of sends for, he acts like a typical bureaucrat, right? Sends, just doesn't want to be responsible for anything. Sends the questions, whatever, to the Vatican, I guess. Who, by the time they get back to him, they're like, well, they don't seem to be particularly interested either. So everyone is sort of missing out on this thing, right? And it's then they want him to perform miracles, and again, he does perform some miracles, and they're all these weird sort of misfires, like I was it a blind man, I think, wanted to see or something, and he doesn't, but he wins the lottery or something. And a leper or something that wanted to be healed, and he doesn't, but the source starts sprouting sunflowers. So again, you're getting these off, but again, it's not sort of life, you're not, again, if you really are supposed to be a man, a person of faith, you're not really supposed to expect God to prove his, you don't ask for specific things. And we all know, there are term, God works in mysterious ways. You don't get direct, God, please let me, get this, attractive boy or girl I'm interested in, or win the lottery, or whatever it is, right? That you're asking God. That's just not the way it works. But they're all sort of shallow and not behaving particularly well, and and he's kind of had it with them pretty quickly. It seems like too. And then he ends up having his sort of brief fame sort of usurped by a girl down the street, right? Who turns in, who is it's a young girl, apparently about 14 or so, goes out to a dance, dancing all night, with maybe even kissing boys and things she's not supposed to be doing. And on her way home, after she'd snuck out without her parents' permission, lightning bolt, she gets struck by a lightning bolt and turned into an arachnid, right, a spider. And by the way, he was a huge Franz Kafka fan, Marquez, and there may have been a little bit of an homage there planted in this story for Kafka's most famous, metamorphosis story, where Gregor Samsa woke one morning from uneasy dreams and discovered he'd been turned into a giant, actually dung beetle is the literal translation, but often interpreted as cockroach. But the Spider Girl again has this, and she's sort of sad, and she tells her tale of woe, and everybody goes there, and again she has. She talks to them in a way the other one doesn't. She's easier. She has this very simple, straightforward lesson she's teaching. She's reinforcing the cultural values, right? It was a girl who didn't listen to her parents and went out dancing and with boys all through the night, and because of that is then transformed into it's a lesson for all their young daughters, something they could all kind of get behind. Again, reinforcing the cultural values of this little village. And she quickly takes his audience, right? But eventually, he sort of, people do kind of lose interest in him, and the young couple doesn't at least sort of cast him out. She sort of puts up with him and lets him sort of live out in the yard, and they even feeds him, for their leftover vegetables or whatever. And eventually, though, one day he seems to be getting his wings back, and gradually, right at the end, he's able to get up a couple of feet. He's able to get a couple of feet more, and eventually, finally, just one day, he goes and he tears a big patch in through the vegetable patch, and almost takes the roof off their cheap little tin shack. But he does catch air, and eventually he does fly away. And she's there's that last line is she cried. I think she weeps a little as she's cutting. I think she's cutting onions. Maybe it's the onions that are making her cry. And he is no longer a nuisance in her life. He was because she followed him till he was just a dot in the sun. But he was no longer a nuisance in his life. He was just a dot in the sun. And again, he's gone back to, I think, maybe angels can kind of go back to her imagining them, what she wants them to be, and not as this sort of a very imperfect thing that they appeared at. And I think there's a bit of a cynical commentary there on human nature, and a fun and kind of wild and interesting little story by the great Gabriel Garcia Marquez.